Hey there. Hello, hello, friends. It's nice to see you again and nice to be back. It feels like it's been a while, I guess, because last Thursday, instead of doing this live, I got to do one with Tim Whitaker with the New Evangelicals. And I had a good time chatting with him about biblical marriage. And I know that some of you were there. That was nice to see. Well, I actually didn't pay any attention to the comments because I needed to focus on our conversation. But I went back later and watched it again and saw some of you commenting and being present there as well. So that was fun for me to see that there were folks there tracking with what we were talking about over on his channel. So if you haven't checked it out, or if you're interested, what we did last Thursday was respond to an hour and a half conversation between Sean McDowell, who is Josh McDowell's son, and I am old enough to be more familiar with Josh McDowell than Sean. But I'm assuming Sean grew up, with the purity culture that his father created and somewhat rebelled against that. Good for him. But Sean is still quite conservative in the way that he reads scripture, etc. So he and Preston Sprinkle had a conversation about same-sex marriage and why the Bible, in their opinion, very much says no to same-sex marriages or relationships. So Tim Whitaker and I responded to that. It's kind of a tough thing to talk about, to be honest, because the Bible doesn't really come out and say yay to, well, actually it does in very strange ways in the Newer Testament passages, in ways that Christians really are not very comfortable with, even very progressive Christians sometimes. But the Bible doesn't really say yay to same-sex marriage. What it does is say just the most horrific things about marriage. And so from my perspective, if you just need to not take the Bible's advice on marriage, really, in general, because women are possessions and it's all this submission and it's just gross stuff. I'm much more in favor of healthy relationships of trust and communication and mutuality and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of an interesting conversation to have. Anyway, so here we are back on Storytime Live. So I want to very quickly let some of you know, first of all, I have been invited to go on a trip with Derek Lambert over at Myth Vision and Neil, I forget his last name, Neil with Gnostic Informant guy, their trip to parts of the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, Qumran, and parts of Galilee next October. So I'm going to share that website really quickly with you, and I can put the link in the comments. Skeptics and Scholars Expedition, a year out, so October of 2024. So we'd love for any of you who want to join us. And I get to go, assuming there are enough people. I think this is that. Yep. So I put the link to it in the comments, and I will pin that, actually. Put user in timeout. Oh, hilarious. Okay. Not putting myself in timeout. That's really funny. I guess I can do that later. I don't know. Pinning it later. I know. It's not cheap. Yeah. Anyway, if those of you who have spending money or traveling money, that kind of thing, would like to join us, I think that'd be really, really fun. So wanted to let you know about that. I'm grateful just to have people here checking out my channel. I love it when you tell a friend about a video and kind of spread the news a little bit, spread the word a little bit about what I'm up to and the conversations I'm trying to have, the honest conversations I'm trying to have about what we find in the Bible. So when you subscribe or we encourage a friend to subscribe, that helps me a lot. I appreciate that. When you share, when you like what's going on my channel, if you're interested in more of like the scholarship that I've written, I do have my dissertation was published in a New Testament library series. It is a dissertation. It is not written for for a general audience, but my first book is titled Abuse, Power, and Fearful Obedience, Reconsidering 1 Peter's Commands to Wives. So I looked at that section in 1 Peter chapter 3 that talks to women. Essentially, it models an abusive relationship in that passage, those 6 verses or so. And I kind of pull it all apart and I look at the materiality of that passage, what this kind of content in the Bible leads to in people's relationships today. I look at it through the lens of, politics, through a post-colonial lens, through a materialist lens, in terms of how these ideas become realized in people's lives, and of course, from a feminist lens. My second book is titled Permission Granted, Take the Bible into Your Own Hands. And that is essentially the same thing as walking through 2 intro courses with me to an intro to the 2 primary Christian testaments. It's like the highlights from those 2 courses that I taught maybe 3 dozen times. Those 2 intro courses, the first 6 years that I taught, I did a lot of intro courses. And so I pulled the juiciest conversations from those classes, put them into a book. And that's what Permission Granted is. So it's me modeling critical thinking as you read through the Bible. It's me asking you the questions in all of these places in the Bible in relation to the biblical content, similar to what I do here in Storytime, to be honest. So if that appeals to you, you might enjoy that. I also did the reading for it in Audible. So the audio version. So that's that way, that you're getting the right tone, what I intended. I've learned that some people, especially conservative folks, are expecting me to be antagonistic. So they read my tone as antagonistic, and I work very hard not to be. I'm much more interested in a conversation than in being antagonistic. I don't find that very productive. So that's out there. And I think some of I have a book that I've just wrapped up the proofs and index for. It's coming out in a couple months still. It's not until November. But that one is titled Marriage in the Bible. What do the texts say? That will be coming out. You can pre-order it on the website, for my publisher website, or over Amazon. And over at the publisher website, which is Roman and Littlefield, you can see the reviews or endorsements of it so far. There are maybe a dozen or so that I have on the book, some on the back cover and some on the inside. You can see the cover, you can see the table of contents, so you can kind of get an idea of the content of the book and if it's going to be of interest to you. So wanted to let you know about that. What else? I'm grateful for all the ways that people support me, and including as patrons on my Patreon account, which is Biblical Bird, if you're interested in supporting me there. And I am still working on creating some courses, actually, that you'd be able to purchase, relatively inexpensive courses, $20, $25 for a course kind of thing. And those I will be selling on my website. So stay tuned for that. They will be under a general label or umbrella, how to engage the Bible without harming yourself or others. That's what the series overall will be titled. So anyway, that's what I'm working on. So let's get into Judges. I tried to warn people in the description for today that this is a very difficult topic. And so content warning. This will probably be a fairly short story time just because it's one story and it's difficult. But we'll just see where this goes. Okay. So I'm going to read and pause as I need to emotionally, kind of like I did with the Samson thing and reading about the 300 foxes. That really caught me off guard that I was so upset by that. I think just because I was really in it and it was very upsetting. And this is very upsetting. This content is very upsetting. So let me just briefly set some context for you about this story. And we are at the very end of Judges. Judges has 21 chapters, and chapter 21 is pretty short. Chapter 20, so I'm going to read from Judges 19. The chapter after this gets into the battle of the tribes of Israel, like minus Benjamin, against Benjamin. So this is the whole book of Judges then is essentially trying to establish that the people need a king. They want a king. This is trying to justify that their judges are not sufficient to lead them in the ways of following Yahweh or whatever, however you want to look at that. So the book of Judges has a whole bunch of people in it. We read through Samson's story recently. I haven't read through any of the other stories in Judges. I will do that in the near future because they pertain to the themes of my story time. Some of them do, not all. So, none of them are sufficient. Some of them are interesting people. Some of them are maybe not the sharpest tool in the shed, but they are great warriors, for instance, with Jephthah, all kinds of things. Samson is, kind of a form of a bipolar, unregulated mess, whose rage is attributed to a spirit of the Lord, which is very interesting. But it's rage, and it's not productive. It's not, it's not helping the people manage. So the book of Judges, in my opinion and my understanding, is about that. It's about being a transition into kingship. Okay. And, it's former, yeah, and that's how it is situated from the Jewish perspective too. It is immediately prior to the book of Samuel and then Kings. And so that is its purpose. It's not, so when we see a story such as what we're about to read, it is awful. And the writers and the people knew that. It's not like they're embracing this as all good stuff. So I do need to be clear about that, right? And so I may end up reading into chapter 20 just to clarify the purpose, to make it clear how this story plays out. Okay. One other thing I want to say is that this ought to sound very similar to Genesis chapter 19 because it is parallel to it. It is essentially echoing it, or you can use whatever language you want to here. The same things that took place in Genesis 19 take place here, except this time we don't have angels from the Lord protecting any humans. And so the threat of gang rape that was threatened in Genesis 19 is actually allowed to go through in Judges 19. Okay. So all kinds of parallels you should be hearing. That is what's happening. Okay. One final thing. I would love it if people have questions regarding what I'm doing, if you could hold those, and I will do a short Q&A at the end instead of trying to address them as I go, because I realize there's about a 9-second delay, I think, something like that. And so I would love to answer questions. And I've noticed that I just kind of keep going, and then I'll see a question pop up, and then I get really confused, like a little sidetracked and blah, blah, blah. So would love to do those at the end. If you don't mind, if you want to just type it out somewhere else so you can save your question. And then when it's time for Q&A at the end, just pop it into we'll do that. We'll do it that way. Okay. So here we go. Here's Judges 19. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite residing in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. So let's pause briefly. Took to himself a concubine. So he took a woman in to his home who was there for sexual purposes. That's it, right? That's what a concubine is. He already has at least one wife, probably has multiple wives. And so she's there to address his sexual needs. Okay. That needs to be taken way more seriously than most people take that, in terms of how we make sense of the rest of the story, or what happens even just in the next couple of verses. Okay. There's a lot of interesting things that have been done to throw the woman under the bus here in the next couple of verses. This is what I mean. But his concubine and the Hebrew and Greek here are confusing for people. Okay. So there's a lot of footnotes. There's a lot of commentary on this. His concubine became angry with him, or did she prostitute herself against him? I don't think those have to be mutually exclusive, by the way. I also think that it doesn't really matter. Let's just keep reading the story. So his concubine, somehow the relationship there wasn't great. Okay. I'd like you to consider who has power in this relationship, right? And, okay. She became angry with him, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. So he's not chasing her down, right? Like, there's so many things going on here, right? Why is, he let her go for 4 months before he even tries to find her? Okay, maybe he's busy. I get it, right? Busy. work keeps you busy. People will say that it's her fault, that this whole scenario, everything that takes place is her fault. She's been prostituting herself against him. So she's selling herself. She's in his possession for sex, right? To begin with. And now one suggestion is that she's actually selling the same thing to others, but actually to make money. So was he not paying her enough? Like, was he not providing enough for her? There are laws about that, right? And that we've talked about in Exodus. Whatever. It's just really interesting to me that that there's even a hint of a suggestion that she deserves what happens to her, or that it's kind of meeting her. She's the one who stepped out. I mean, literally, she's been procured from her father to provide a man with sex. It's really just disgusting. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so she's back home with her father for 4 months before he does anything in terms of coming back to find her. Really interesting, right? Then her man, my English says husband, her man set out after her to speak tenderly to her and bring her back. Okay, if you know anything about abusive relationships, you know that he's the one who has stepped out, not her, right? She left him. She went back to her father. He took 4 months to cool down. Like, whatever, however you want to look at that. But he's the one, if he's speaking tenderly to her and trying to get her to come back home, he's the one who's been an asshole. Okay. It's clear. It's just that clear to me. Okay. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys. When he reached her father's house, the girl's father saw him and came with joy to meet him. Again, I think we could have a conversation about that. Is he actually excited to see this man who has been abusing his daughter? Or is he putting on a facade? Are we meant to think that he's happy to see? Does she eat too much and he can't afford to feed her and he's happy he's come to claim her? I don't know, but I think it's really interesting. I'm not sure I agree with this telling of the story as part of my point. Doesn't matter. This is what the story says. His father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay. And he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank, and he stayed there. On the 4th day, they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the girl's father said to him, "Fortify yourself with a bit of food, and after that you may go." So the two men sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, "Why not spend the night and enjoy yourself?" When the man got up to go, his father-in-law kept urging him until he spent the night there again. Are you wondering what's going on here? I had a student one time, I love this, say that the reason the father was delaying their departure is he was trying to line up a hit on the Levite. Or that he was trying to line up what happens in the town in Gibeah. But anyway, I just think that's kind of funny. Anyway, so on the 5th day, he got up early in the morning to leave. And the girl's father said, "Fortify yourself." So they lingered until the day declined, and the two of them ate and drank. When the man with his concubine and his servant got up to leave, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Look, the day is worn on until it's almost evening. Spend the night. See, the day is drawn to a close. Spend the night here and enjoy yourself. Tomorrow, you can get up early in the morning for your journey and go home." Yeah, he really just doesn't want to let his daughter go, right? But the man would not spend the night. He got up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddle donkeys, and his concubine was with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, the slave, the enslaved person, said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into a city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will continue on to Gibeah." Then he said to his enslaved person, "Come, let us try to reach one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or Ramah." Ramah. So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah. which belongs to Benjamin, one of the tribes of Israel, right? They turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. He went in and sat down in the open square of the city, but no one took them in to spend the night. Again, this is just like what we saw in Genesis chapter 19. Then at evening, there was an old man coming from his work in the field. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was residing in Gibeah. And then we have a parenthetical comment. The people of the place were Benjaminites, in case you've forgotten it from 3 verses before. When the old man looked up and saw the wayfarer in the open square of the city, he said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" He answered him, "We're passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to my home. Nobody has offered to take me in. We, your servants, have straw and fodder for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and the woman and the young man along with us. We need nothing more." The old man said, "Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants. Oh, do not spend the night in the square." Again, just as Lot urged the visiting angels not to do the same. So he brought him into his house and fed the donkeys, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. While they were enjoying themselves, the men of the city, a perverse lot, surrounded the house and started pounding on the door. I mean, the parallels here are pretty shocking. They said to the old man, the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house so that we may have intercourse with him." So just so we're clear, is that what they actually mean? That's what they say. That's how people read it. Is that really what the story means? Do they mean to say we're going to have sex with this guy? No, that is not what they want to do, right? The men of the city, the entire city full of men, surround a single house and ask to have someone thrown out to them. This isn't going to be consensual and pleasurable, right? So what I'm pointing to is that scripture is misleading. The story itself is misleading, or they're mislabeling what's happening here. This isn't about pleasure or consensual interactions. This is about raping someone. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man is my guest, do not do this vile thing. Here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Ravish them and do whatever you want to them, but against this man, do not do such a vile thing." But the men would not listen to him. So the man seized his concubine and put her out to them. They wantonly raped her and abused her all through the night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. As morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. In the morning, her master got up, opened the doors of the house, and when he went out to go on his way, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. She had gotten so close and not fully gotten there. "Get up," he said to her. "We're going." It's just all kinds of warm and fuzzy there, right? But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man set out for his home. When he had entered his house, he took a knife, and grasping his concubine, he cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. Then he commanded the men whom he sent, saying, "Thus shall you say to all the Israelites, has such a thing ever happened since the day that the Israelites came up from the land of Egypt until this day? Consider it. Take counsel and speak out." I'm going to keep going. Then all the Israelites came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled in one body before the Lord at Mizpah. The chiefs of all the people, of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers bearing arms. Now the Benjaminites heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the Israelites said, "Tell us, how did this criminal act come about?" The Levite, the man, my English is husband, of the woman who was murdered. Now, see, that's interesting, isn't it? Because we just can't tell if he's the one who murdered her or if they are, right? We can't tell if she was still breathing and alive when he got her home and started dismembering her, right? We're also not sure which piece of this he is angry about. Which is it that he is speaking out about? Is it that his property had been messed with? Is it that he had been led to such, what is it that's been offensive here is the question. And it's not clear. It really isn't clear to me in the story. It isn't clear to me in this chapter afterwards. It's right. So we don't, I think he's really more upset about just the basic lack of hospitality than about the fact that this woman whom he had purchased for sexual pleasure reasons, had been so desperately abused. I don't know that that's what he's upset about. I think he's upset about the thing in general. And that from his perspective, better her than him, right? "Tell us how this criminal act came about," he said. "I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. The lords of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house at night. They intended to kill me, and they raped my concubine until she died." Could be. "Then I took my concubine and cut her into pieces." Notice she's being called a concubine. She doesn't have a name. She is there for, she is a vessel to be used, right? Then I took my concubine, cut her into pieces, and sent her throughout the whole extent of Israel's territory, for they have committed a vile outrage in Israel. Again, so now you Israelites, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. I think from his, it is perhaps both pieces, the desperate lack of hospitality, but also what's been done to her. I don't think that I have a really hard time believing he's all that upset about her. And this is what we should expect at this point in time. And it's what we should expect from these texts. And it's what we should blah, 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 right? That women are not as valuable. And so, of course, a man would see her as disposable in this kind of a way, right? Better her than me, or whatever. I think of the beginning of the story, and there are commentaries. It's really disturbing to me. There are commentaries that will say that this kind of a punishment, this kind of abuse of her and her body, is kind of justified given that she stepped out on him at the beginning of the story. I've read Christian men write those words and publish those words, and it is not lost on me that they are saying that they do not have a hard time, that they're not, if that's how they understand the story, that her cheating on him, which is funny because she's literally been purchased purely for the sake of sex. So why does he care if she's having with someone else? But anyway, she's his. So if she's getting some money on the side, okay, he's apparently upset about that, but I don't buy that that's what was going on. But anyway, they will read it that way, right? She stepped out on him to make some money for herself. And so that is this kind of an end to her life, is fitting, if you will. Not outrage. I don't see outrage, right? I don't see people getting outrageously upset about this. And so I had to read Texts of Terror by Phyllis Trible. And there's a chapter on this unnamed concubine in that book. If you've not read it, it's a great one to read. I think we've read enough of this. This does become. Let me read one more paragraph, and then we'll wrap this up for today. All the people got up as one, saying, "We will not any of us go to our tents, nor will any of us return to our houses. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. We will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000 to bring provisions for the troops who are going to repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the disgrace that they have done in Israel." And this is perhaps meant to just be the icing on the cake, or, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, that Benjamin has been behaving badly for a long time. And this is just one example of it, I think, right? So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one. The tribes of Israel sent men throughout all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What crime is this that has been committed among you? Hand over those scoundrels in Gibeah so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel." But the Benjaminites would not listen to their kinsfolk, the Israelites. The Benjaminites came together out of the towns to Gibeah to go out to battle against the Israelites. On that day, the Benjaminites mustered 26,000 armed men from their towns, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah. Of all this force, there were 700 picked men who were left-handed. Every one could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And the Israelites, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 armed men, all of them warriors. The Israelites proceeded to go. Do you see what's happening here? We have women and women's bodies, right, being used or abused, and it's a vehicle for battle between men. I mean, it's kind of gross how often this happens. I don't know. The whole the whole thing with, the Trojan War, like, really, you're fighting over a woman? Is that really what happened? No, this is just justifying. You need to go out and fight. You want to spill some blood. I don't know. Over and over, what happens to a female is just this little moment, and then the men get to make this huge story out of it and get to do all this great stuff based on it. Same thing happens to Bathsheba. We'll read about her soon. Right? Where the things about the women take 4 or 5 verses, and then what the men are doing is like the focus of the whole story, the whole thing, right? It's really interesting. Again, I'm critiquing an ancient text for being what it is. And I'm commenting on something that is, but it's disturbing to me because people don't notice it. You have, when I point something out like that, when we read the story of David and Bathsheba, right, what happens to her is like 4 or 5 verses, no joke. And the rest of it is about David and what happens to him because of, and she's being punished the whole time and nobody pays attention to that. And all this stuff was done to her and forced on her and blah, 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 blah. And that it's just this little segment. And then we have just 2 or 3 chapters about David and poor David and what happened, But you have to point it out to people because people won't notice. People who grew up with these stories or grew up hearing the focus be on men the whole time, right, don't even realize that a woman or a woman's body or something about a woman and her body is used as a launching off point for this big drama for men. It's really quite interesting. So back to Judges 19 and what happens to this woman. I think just in reading it is enough, right? Pointing out the way she is mistreated, the same thing happened, right, in Genesis 19, where Lot offers his 2 virginal daughters who have not, they have fiancés, but they haven't known a man yet. That would be quite a lovely prize for these men to take the non-existent status of virginity from them. But And Lot is giving up wealth by letting his virginal daughters be, raped, because then they wouldn't be worth as much. So, that was what was going on there. And then the angels intercede, and it doesn't have to happen, but here it does. So everything is just terribly awry in Benjamin. That's what this story is telling us. She's not even named, folks. She's not even named. Okay, let's take questions. But yeah, I saw a comment about left-handedness. Yeah. So if you have some questions, this would be the time. I'm going to just kind of pause here for a moment to give you all time to respond to that. Since there's a delay, about an 8 to 10 second delay here. Any questions for me about this chapter or about this chapter? Okay, there's a question. Let me just put it up here. Okay, the speculated location of Sodom and the land of Benjamin are nearly the same, if not identical. Is there anything to this? Let's see. I actually was not aware of that, to be honest. Let me see. Sodom. Yeah, I can't speak to that. I can see a map. I have a map I'm looking at right now, but I don't know where this, as you say, the speculated location of Sodom. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, Nitty. I am not able to speak to that. Another question here. The split between Israel and Judah at, again, the same point near Dead Sea. I think, I'm not sure if I'm tracking. Yes. So that is so Jerusalem in the near future for the Israelite people, Jebus, which is Jerusalem later on. Yes, that is kind of the northern portion of what becomes the southern kingdom, right? And then the northern kingdom. And the northern kingdom isn't called Israel, and the southern kingdom isn't called Judah. But they have not split yet, because they have not joined yet obviously they don't have a king yet. So yeah, I'm sorry, I cannot speak to the potential location of where people think Sodom may have been located. I know that there are descriptions of the geography and blah blah blah, and that's just not something I've ever tracked with to try to see, when they talk about Lot and they talk about the people, where when Abraham and Lot split apart and go different directions, and where Lot settles and all that stuff. To be honest, it's not something I've ever paid attention to, and it's just because it's not of interest to me. I'm not trying to say it isn't interesting. It's just my interest is in other things about these scriptures at this point in my career. My thought is that the Northern Kingdom is compiling this to shame the Southern's primary tribes. I think it's a really interesting suggestion, because I don't know anything about the actual where we get the stories for Judges. My prior sense of things is that most of the Hebrew Bible is coming from the perspective of the Southern Kingdom, because it's all being written post all of that stuff happening. And the Northern Kingdom is thrown under the bus time and time again. They are demonized simply for creating other places for worship. What are their alternatives? They don't have access to Jerusalem. Like, it's just smart, if you ask me. What else are they supposed to do? It just irritates the crap out of me that the way they are demonized over and over and over again. It's just totally uncalled for. Makes me very angry, because so many people then read it positivistically and think that the Northern Kingdom people are just trash, because of that. So that could be. These are elements I've not sat with or studied or looked into. So sorry, Nitty, that I don't have more to say on that. Is it ever addressed that her lack of obedience was her proof of was her proof of death to him? Her lack of obedience. Oh, the fact that he says, "Get up, we're going," and she doesn't? No, I mean, I'm sure some people read it that way, but I don't, and others have not. Hebrew Bible scholars have others have said, "Look, we really can't tell. It's just as possible that he's the one killing her." Um, what's your takeaway message about this story relative for today? Yeah, I am seeing your follow-up. He doesn't check for life, Carrie Ann. Yeah. I'm gonna come back to this, Linda. Right, he doesn't check for life. Um, I think that's just it doesn't even really matter to him, honestly, is my take on that. And or I think, depending on the day, sometimes I do read somewhat sympathetically to him. Like in that situation, it truly was somebody had to be like somebody was going down. I'm not at all justifying any of it. I'm saying somebody had to be thrown to the mob. Like had the mob not been appeased with a body, they would have come into the house and probably taken everybody, right? I'm not trying to justify anything. I'm just talking it out, right? And so somebody had to go. And was he just terrified and he knew he was sacrificing her not just for repeated gang rape, but for her life? Like, did he know that? And that's why when he saw her, he's like, "Oh my God, she's still here. Like, get up, let's go. Like, I can't believe you're still here." Was he surprised and I mean, and of course he didn't check for life because of course he was dead. Like, I think that there are ways to read it that way. And I think that that could very well be, right? I'm just so annoyed in general that I like to make him out to be the evil guy because he's awful to her in other places, but just because he's awful and perhaps abusive and all that, and literally purchased her for the sake of using her body, all that aside, that doesn't mean that he still wasn't upset by what happened to her. So I think, and I'm leaving Linda's question up here because I think it's such a good one and it's an important one. Is there even a takeaway message from this story for us for today? I think I have a couple thoughts about that. I don't believe that he would have treated her well. Sorry, I'm going to come back to Linda's. If she was alive, he would have, I don't believe that. That's the thing. I don't believe he would have treated her wounds because he had already pushed her away. He'd pissed her off or not fed her enough or something. And so she left, right? It was bad enough for her to leave him, whatever it was. And she, going into this, she knew she was just for a vessel, right? And that got bad enough that she returned to her father, and it took him 4 months to come get her. I personally do not believe that that he would have treated her wounds. I don't, but that's just me. Okay. My takeaway from this story is multiple things. I think of moments like this, stories like this actually just show us how bad how bad patriarchy is. Kind of, it's like an eruption in what's being kind of kept under wraps decently enough-ish. And then it's just, and this is what it looks like, run rampant or whatever, when you just kind of pull back the veil or something like that. So, when we look, so it's similar to me as in when we look at, which we will do, gosh, it turns my stomach thinking about this stuff today. When the prophets depict God as calling Israel God's woman, And then God proceeds to call Israel a whore over and over and over again, right? This is awful, and it's gross, and it's all kinds of stuff. But it's the logical conclusion of all the stuff that's happening, all the nature of the relationships, the nature of the way men and women are embodied and described and socialized and all of that stuff. So for me, one of the takeaways from this story is this is what it looks like. This is how people are valued and not valued when push comes to shove. Women are more disposable than men. Let's take that to heart about this worldview and about the people that wrote these stories, that this is where they're coming from. This tells us something about, the fact that she's not named is important to me because names are important, and she's never given one in this story. And does that make it easier for us that she is then gang raped and dismembered because we never gave her a name? Would it be harder for us to read the story if she had been given a name? Does that level of dehumanization, step or two down, not giving her a name, does that just make it easier to tolerate all the violence and lack of value of life and disrespect for life? Do I think there's anything positive out of this? No. I think that the takeaways can sometimes be, take this to heart. This is where these stories are coming from, of people who behave like this. At the same time, right, this whole book, the whole book of Judges, is meant to show how messy things are and to show how bad things are, right? Hang on. So, I don't know. I think that's all I can say on that. I'm wondering if, thank you. I'm wondering if that's enough. I'm wondering if there are other comments or questions that I wanted to. Okay, I'm going to read this one. I haven't read it all. So let's see. My takeaway message of today's story is God's chosen genocidal men. I'm sorry. Enslaved in his name, the little virgin girls, just to impregnate them, surrogate mothers, concubines, sex slaves, gang rape. Yeah. Yeah. That's really, it is what we're talking about, isn't it? That's Ted Bundy shit. Throw her body in the trunk of the donkey and take her home for dismemberment. Yeah. I think that's, and this is kind of my response to Linda again. This is, I do think that's one of the takeaways as well. This is what we're seeing happening, and regardless of whether or not he was upset by it, this is where it all started. I think it is, and I think the fact that this story also goes untold. It is not a story that most people know about, for instance. To me, that's also another takeaway, right? That this is such a horrible story. It's in the Bible. It does parallel. Oh gosh, so that just opened up the can for me. I'd forgotten about this whole thing that I do think of in terms of the story. So, what is it? Raise your hand if you've heard of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the story of Sodom and Lot and whatever. Right? Raise your hand. And did you have to grow up in a Christian home to know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, or the story of Sodom? No, you did not, right? In this country, at least in the United States, you did not need to grow up in a Christian home or a Jewish home to know about the story of Sodom, right? And the fire burning down, coming down from the heavens and blowing it all up, right? Destroying the city. You did not need to. Now, in that story, God is punishing Sodom for being cruel and inhospitable. And we know everything about that story. We know people know that story just kind of offhand, right? And it's men are protected in that story. men and women, but men, we know about that. And people make that a thing about judging men and their sexuality, even though I don't think Genesis 19 is about sexuality at all. I think it's about cruelty. But we know about that story. And the parallel story to it, in which a woman is gang raped and dismembered, most people have never heard of. What does that tell you? What does it tell you? That she is literally dismembered by the person who owns her, and you've never heard of it. But this one over here, where a man's bodily integrity is threatened, not even actual, there wasn't even a fulfillment of that in the story. It's just threatened in the story, at the level of story, and people just lose their shit over it. I think they should, but they tend to lose their shit for the wrong reasons. And you've never even heard of this one about a woman and her body. This is one of the takeaways to me. This is the issue, that this is in there, and this mentality of this lack of respect for women and women's bodies and bodily autonomy and integrity. And it's so carelessly and carefree, like carelessly just tossed around in the biblical text time and time again. Men get to do what they want to with women's bodies. And I do see a thread connecting to today. I don't think that this is where it all started, though, Linda. I think this is an example kind of set in stone for us, but I think it long predates these stories. This issue of maleness, groupthink, fear of femaleness, and therefore the need to control it and own it, instead of be in open communication relationship with it, belittling what is different or other instead of appreciating, valuing all that. So I do see this as a marker at a point in time for us. But I don't think it's, I think it's just, the issue is old by the time right, by the time this happens. There's a whole book on this, Judges 19-21 and the Othering of Benjamin, by William Kreisel. Thank you for that. I am not familiar with that, and I appreciate that. Takeaway number 2, the Bible isn't censored by content, and children have this book. Yeah, right? Sure, yeah. The chapter 6 in my book, Permission Granted, cover-ups and other edited stories, that comes out of reading, not necessarily this particular story, but reading the actual version of Samson with people, reading the flood stories with people, reading through Jonah and getting past chapter 2 with people, because people stop at chapter 2 and they think that the book of Jonah is about obedience. It's not about obedience. It's about God actually loving your enemies. That's what it's actually about. And what a dramatic shift that would be if people were, instead of coloring a whale, which is inappropriate to begin with, instead of having children coloring whales, that we have them coloring a scenario of people reaching out in love and peace towards those you've had considered your enemies. Like, it just radically different story if you're focused on the actual. So when I teach about Jonah in intro courses, it blows people's minds. They're like, there's a whole nother 2 chapters beyond what I thought there was in this story. Yeah. And why do you suppose we keep teaching children the edited versions and the cover-up versions? And so, yes, this is content that children have access to, and they really perhaps shouldn't. The Bible validates these things. The inclusion of these narratives in the Hebrew Bible seems to detract from the Christian claim of inspiration, especially if these texts have a purpose of shaming communities or leaders. Agreed, Nitty. Yeah, that this is why I think it's important to talk about these passages, because people, precisely what you just said, that is why it's important to me to talk about these. It is not a good book. It will lead to your harm. It is a dangerous book to engage fully, and I think that needs to be taken seriously. What do we know about which story is the original? Oh dear. I don't know, Martin. I mean, I do think the one in Genesis is older, but I don't have anything to base that on. I can't point to a scholar talking about that. Yeah, yep, wondering the same thing. Is there parallels? Right. Why aren't all these horror, rape, and enslavement stories depicted in the Oh, I've packed up most of my books for my office. I have a book called oh shoot, what's it called? It's the Brick Testament. Has anyone heard of those? The Brick Testaments? This one is it of the stories, several stories from the Hebrew Bible, and it's depicted in Legos. So it's a children's book. It's not a children's book. And I had a roommate one time who didn't understand what it was I did, and he thought I was I love the Bible kind of a person, but I'm not. I'm a biblical scholar, and so he read the book to his daughter, 6-year-old daughter. It was really awkward. I just and he didn't get it. He didn't get the problem. Oh, it's very awkward. Okay. Let's see what else. The Bible is basically like this game that came out 20 years ago. Manhunt. So basically, it's a snuff book. So many things like foreskins. Okay, yeah, so many things to say here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the chat at the end. I appreciate this. I hope that worked out okay for you to hold your questions that way. It was much more is it easier for me to track with my own thoughts and stay focused. So I appreciate doing it that way. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you. And I'm going to wrap it up. I may actually get back to Deuteronomy laws to wrap that up on Thursday. We'll see. But I will see you all. See you next time. Thanks for being here or for watching on the replay.